They say trust is earned, but in families we don't think twice about giving it. We hand it over without hesitation, believing love is enough to keep it safe. That's what makes betrayal so much more painful. It doesn't come from an enemy or a stranger. It comes from the very people you'd never expect. I spent my whole life building something. Not a fortune, not a legacy written in stone, but something that mattered deeply to me. My hands have known the burn of labor, the ache of effort, all to build a life for my family. And among everything I ever owned, there was one thing that carried more than just value. It carried memories. My car, a 1971 Chevelle SS. More than just chrome and steel, it was a part of my story. It was there when I brought my newborn son home from the hospital. It was the car we drove to our first family camping trip. I cleaned it every Sunday as a ritual. To anyone else, it was just an old muscle car. To me, it was a symbol of everything I'd earned. So when I walked into the garage one morning and saw an empty space where it used to be, my heart dropped. I didn't sell it. I hadn't even agreed to. Yet it was gone. Vanished. And then it hit me. The only person who had access, the only one who'd been acting distant, was my own son. I trusted him. I raised him. And he had sold the one thing I held dearest, behind my back. All for a so-called good cause I knew nothing about. At that moment I realized this wasn't just about a car. It was about betrayal from the one person I never thought would hurt me. My own flesh and blood. My name is Jacob. I'm not rich, I'm not famous, I don't live in a mansion, and no one's writing newspaper articles about me. But none of that ever mattered. What I've always taken pride in, what I've held on to through the highs and lows of life, is simple: a car, a 1971 Chevelle SS. To some that might sound silly. It's just metal and rubber, a thing that burns gas and takes up space in a garage. But to me, it's more than just a car. It's a symbol of sacrifice, of grit, of holding on when everything else feels like it's slipping through your fingers. I bought it after 10 long years of working 2 jobs, days at the factory, nights hauling freight in a truck just to make ends meet. I never had a safety net, no inheritance, no family business to walk into. Just my calloused hands, my stubborn will, and a dream that someday I could look at something, anything, and say, I built this. That car was my reward, my quiet rebellion against a life that kept telling me I wasn't good enough. It wasn't showroom perfect, not at first. When I got it, it was beat up, rust creeping along the edges, paint faded, engine barely humming. But I didn't care. I saw what it could be, the way some people see potential in an old house or a forgotten song. Every weekend for nearly 2 years, I poured myself into that car. Not just money, but time, sweat, and patience. I sanded it, down by hand. I replaced every part myself. I learned as I went. I still remember the first time the engine roared to life after the rebuild. It wasn't just the sound of a machine starting. It was the sound of all my effort coming full circle. Over time, it became more than a project. It became part of the family. I remember the day my wife and I brought our son David home from the hospital. We buckled him into a tiny car seat in the back of the Chevelle. She laughed and told me I was crazy for taking a newborn in an old car like that, but I told her, it's the safest place I know. That car was there for every milestone. Our 5th anniversary, we drove out to the lake, just the 2 of us, windows down, music playing. Later, when David was a little older, I'd catch him sitting in the driver's seat pretending to steer, his tiny hands gripping the wheel like he was racing. He used to beg me to let him ride in it when I picked him up from school just so his friends could see. Back then, it made him proud too. But it wasn't just the memories, it was the feeling that came with them. The smell of engine oil and leather. The way the sun hit the hood just right in the afternoon. The sound of that V8 rumbling in the driveway, letting the whole neighborhood know it was alive. The car was my therapy, my escape. On hard days when bills piled up or work drained me dry, I'd step into that garage, roll up my sleeves, and lose myself in the hum of the tools and the smell of gasoline. It reminded me that even in a world where most things are out of your control, you can still create something beautiful with your own two hands. Our garage wasn't fancy, just a narrow space with concrete floors and old shelves lined with greasy rags, spare bolts, and memories. But to me, it was sacred ground. That's where I taught David how to check the oil, how to use a wrench, how to listen to the way a machine talks to you if you pay attention. I always hoped those lessons would stick. Not just the mechanical ones, but the deeper ones. Patience, discipline, pride in your work. I thought I was showing him the value of craftsmanship and legacy. I thought he understood. As David got older, things changed. Like most teenagers, he started drifting. He didn't come to the garage as often. His interests moved to things I didn't fully understand. Phones, gaming, hanging out with friends I barely knew. That's normal, I told myself. Every generation moves differently. But still, part of me hoped that one day, when he was ready, he'd come back to the garage and see the car with fresh eyes, not just as a machine, but as a piece of his own story. The older I got, the more the car became less about me and more about what I could pass down. I didn't have stocks or real estate to leave behind, but I had that car. I wanted it to be his one day, not just handed to him, but earned. I imagined us working on it together again, him bringing his own son someday and telling him, "Your grandpa built this." That's the kind of legacy I dreamed of. So when David started talking about how the car was just sitting there, how maybe we should sell it while it still had value, I felt a sting I didn't expect. At first, I brushed it off. He didn't mean it. He just didn't understand. But the comments kept coming. It takes up too much space. We could use the money. What's the point of keeping it? I tried to explain, but it was like talking to a wall. He saw a hunk of metal. I saw decades of my life. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't want to push him away further. So I said, "We'll think about it." A non-answer. A father's way of avoiding conflict. I thought that would buy me time. Time to show him, to make him feel what I felt. But in hindsight, I realize now that's where I made the first mistake. Because while I was trying to preserve something sacred, he was quietly preparing to let it go. David's shift wasn't sudden, but it was undeniable. The boy who once sat cross-legged on the garage floor, wide-eyed as I explained how spark plugs worked, had grown distant, detached. At first, I blamed it on adolescence. Teenagers have their phases, attitudes, new priorities, a hunger for independence. But there was something different about this. His questions about the car weren't coming from curiosity anymore. They were laced with impatience, frustration, even resentment. "It's just collecting dust, Dad," he said one night over dinner, casually between bites of his burger, like he was talking about an old jacket. I glanced up from my plate, caught the way he didn't meet my eyes, and simply replied, "That car's part of the family, David." He scoffed, not disrespectfully, but enough to let me know he didn't see it the way I did. "It's just a car," he mumbled under his breath. "Just a car." Those 3 words stuck in my chest like a shard of glass. From that night on, his tone became more direct. He started asking specific questions. How much it might be worth if I'd ever considered selling it, whether I still had the title. One evening, he even brought up a family friend whose dad had sold his vintage Camaro for over 30 grand. "Think about it," he said. "That money could pay off bills, fix the roof, maybe even help someone out who needs it." There was a flicker of conviction in his eyes when he said that last part, but I dismissed it. I told him I'd think about it, even though in my heart, I already knew the answer. That car wasn't going anywhere. I thought he'd drop it after that. I truly believed that he'd respect my decision. I believed, like any father would, that even if he didn't understand my reasons, he'd at least honor them. I was wrong. It was a Thursday when it happened. A regular day, or so I thought. I was running errands and had been out most of the afternoon. The sun was starting to set by the time I pulled into the driveway. As I walked toward the garage, something felt off. The air was still, too still. I opened the side door and instinctively reached for the light. The moment the bulb flickered on, my heart dropped. The space where the Chevelle had sat for years was empty. Just oil-stained concrete and silence. At first, I thought maybe it had been towed. Maybe someone had broken in. But nothing else was disturbed. Tools were still on the bench, the tarp folded neatly on the stool. My mind started spinning. Had I been robbed? Was there a mix-up? Was this some kind of prank? I called David. No answer. I called again. Nothing. My stomach sank further with every unanswered ring. I paced the garage, checking the corners, checking the driveway again as if maybe, somehow, the car would reappear if I stared long enough. It never did. Eventually, the door creaked open, and there he was. David. Casual. Backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in. He froze when he saw me standing there, and for a split second, I saw the guilt flicker across his face. It was all the confirmation I needed. "Where's the car?" I asked. No anger, just a flat, hollow question. He hesitated, took a breath, then said it. Quietly, almost like he hoped I wouldn't hear. "I sold it." 3 words. So simple, so devastating. I felt something inside me crack. I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe. My ears rang with a kind of silence that only comes when your heart's been yanked out of your chest. "You... what?" I finally managed. He rushed to explain, like it would somehow make sense if he said it fast enough. "Look, I know you're mad, but just listen. I sold it to help Caleb, his family's struggling, his dad lost his job, they were about to lose their house, and I..." He stopped when he saw my face. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shouting. I was just stunned. "You sold my car," I said slowly, deliberately. "The one thing I told you was never for sale. You gave away something that didn't belong to you." "I did it for a good reason," he insisted. "They needed the money more than we did. You never even drive it anymore. What's the point? Of letting it rot in the garage?" He was defending it, justifying it, like he was the hero of the story, like he had the right. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that he didn't even understand why it mattered. He saw it as a lifeless object, a resource to be redistributed. But what he didn't see, what he never even tried to see, was that the Chevelle was the last living piece of a life I had fought tooth and nail to build. It was my fatherhood, my marriage, my youth, my sacrifice all rolled into one. And just like that, gone, sold, given away to someone else because he decided it was the right thing to do. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him who he thought he was. But instead I stood there in silence. That kind of heavy, suffocating silence that speaks louder than rage. He fidgeted, avoided eye contact, then muttered something about how I would have never agreed, and how he had to do something. I could barely hear him. My mind was somewhere else, lost in memories of drives with his mother, of handing him his first toy wrench, of promising myself that one day, that car would be his. His. Not like this. I walked out of the garage, my feet heavy. David called after me once, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Something inside me had broken. Not just the trust, but the belief that he understood me, even just a little. That night I sat in my chair staring at the blank TV screen for hours, trying to wrap my head around it. Betrayal doesn't always come from hatred or anger. Sometimes it comes from ignorance, from the people who love you doing the wrong thing, convinced it's right. But that doesn't make it hurt any less, and that's when I knew. There was no yelling that would fix this, no speech, no grounding, no punishment. If David was ever going to understand the weight of what he had done, it wouldn't be through words. It would have to be through something deeper, something unforgettable, not to punish him, but to teach him. He needed to feel the loss, the cost of disrespect, the pain of destroying something built through love. And so I decided if he wanted to make a choice that bold, I'd show him what it truly meant to live with it. The days after the betrayal were quiet. Too quiet. David tiptoed around the house like a stranger, and I let him. I didn't speak. Much. I couldn't. My silence was not a punishment. It was the only thing I had left to protect myself. How could I talk to him when every word he said might twist the knife deeper? He went about his days like nothing had happened, burying himself in his phone or locking himself in his room. The distance between us was no longer invisible. It was thick and heavy, like fog that refused to lift. Every time I walked past the garage, that empty space gnawed at me. It was like a tooth had been ripped out of my soul. The Chevelle was gone, and with it, something sacred between father and son had fractured, maybe beyond repair. And yet, I didn't yell. I didn't explode like part of me wanted to. I was raised by a man who believed that pain taught best when it was quiet. He didn't need to raise his voice. He let the weight of his silence do the speaking. So that's what I did. I let David live in the silence he created. I let him sit in the shadow of his own choices. I think he expected me to be angry, to lash out, ground him, scream, maybe even shove him out of the house in a rage. But when I did none of that, when I offered him no reaction at all, that's when the cracks in his confidence began to show. I saw it in the way he lingered outside the garage door at night, staring into that hollow space. In the way he stopped bringing friends around. In the way his eyes sometimes looked for mine across the dinner table, only to find I wasn't looking. I began learning more about this so-called good cause. The friend, Caleb, had fallen on hard times. His father lost his job. Their home was on the brink of foreclosure, and they were drowning in bills. David, in all his adolescent idealism, thought he could be the hero. He saw an opportunity to fix something, to prove himself useful. He had the key, the access, and enough nerve to make a reckless decision. He believed giving Caleb the money would solve everything. But he didn't ask. He didn't consider what that car meant, not just to me, but to our family. And perhaps, worst of all, he didn't think I'd care enough to notice until it was too late. But I noticed. Every day. Late one night, I went out to the garage by myself. I stood in the middle of that cold concrete floor, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside. I looked around at the tools still neatly hanging on the wall, the socket wrench set I'd used since the 90s, the faded photo of David at age 6, holding up a greasy carburetor with a toothy grin. That space used to be our sanctuary, a place of learning, of laughter, of legacy, and now it felt like a hollow shrine to something that no longer existed. That's when it hit me. I could yell at him. I could shame him. But what would that teach? He already believed he had done the right thing. What he needed wasn't punishment. It was perspective. He needed to feel the loss, not just see my pain but understand it. And not because I forced it down his throat, but because he came to that realization on his own. That's when the idea began to take root, not as revenge, but as a lesson in consequence. He had taken something irreplaceable from me. Now I would give him the chance to earn it back, not by words but by work. I started making calls. I had the VIN memorized, so tracking the car wasn't as impossible as I feared. Luckily, the buyer hadn't taken it far. A man named Curtis, about an hour out of town, who had bought it for a steal, unaware of the real story behind the sale. When I explained, he listened quietly. I told him the car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a piece of my life, taken without consent. Curtis was surprisingly empathetic. "I can't imagine losing something like that," he said, "especially not to your own kid." He didn't need the money badly. He was a collector, not a flipper. And after a long conversation, he agreed to sell it back. Not at a profit, not as a favor, just as one man to another. He understood what it meant. I didn't tell David, not yet. Instead, I waited. I let him stew in the discomfort a little longer, not to be cruel, but because I knew the lesson hadn't settled in yet. One evening, he approached me in the kitchen, hesitant and quiet. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't say anything, just nodded. He looked nervous, like a kid approaching a judge. I'm sorry. About the car. I thought I was helping someone who needed it. I thought you'd understand if you knew the reason. His voice cracked at the end. Not quite a sob, but close. I didn't mean to hurt you. And maybe he didn't. Maybe his heart was in the right place. But the road to hell, as they say, is paved with good intentions. I finally spoke. Calmly. Do you know what it took for me to buy that car? He shook his head. 10 years of backbreaking work. 10 years of doing jobs no one else wanted. That car wasn't just a reward. It was proof that hard work means something, and you gave it away like it was junk. I could see the shame in his eyes now. It was starting to click. Slowly, painfully, but surely. David didn't say anything after I told him the story behind the car, at least not right away. He just stood there, eyes downcast, face pale, his body language folding in on itself like a child who had been sent to the principal's office, and finally realized why. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from before. This time, it was no longer built from avoidance or guilt. It was the silence of someone beginning to carry the weight of their own choices. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. He wasn't just sorry because he got caught or because I was upset. He was beginning to understand. But understanding alone wasn't enough. He needed to feel it. The value of what had been, lost not just the object, but the respect, the legacy, the trust. I told him I wanted to show him something. The next day, I had him follow me to the garage. That same empty space still stared back at us, but I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, mixed with longing. Like he missed it too, though he'd never say it out loud. I handed him an old wrench. His old wrench, the first one I ever gave him. You remember this? I asked. He nodded slowly. We're going to use it again, but only if you're willing to do this the right way. He looked confused at first, but then I told him the truth. The car wasn't gone anymore, I had bought it back. He blinked, stunned, like he didn't quite believe me. You got it back? He asked. How? I told him about Curtis, about the conversation, about how sometimes doing the right thing doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from humility and listening. He understood what it meant, I said. Now it's your turn. That's when I laid it out for him. The car was back, but it wasn't coming home yet. It needed work, intentionally. I'd made sure of that. The engine had been pulled. The interior needed restoration. Cosmetic damage I could have paid someone to fix, I left untouched. If David wanted redemption, if he truly wanted to earn my trust again, he'd have to rebuild the very thing he'd torn apart. I wasn't going to do it for him. I'd be there to guide, but the work would be his. To my surprise, he didn't argue. He didn't protest, he just nodded. Okay, he said quietly. When do we start? We started the next weekend. It was awkward at first. He didn't remember half the tools and his hands were clumsy. He stripped a bolt within the first 15 minutes and dropped the distributor cap twice. I bit my tongue and let him make the mistakes. That was part of the process. Learning, failing, trying again. With every session, he grew more patient, more curious, more like the boy I remembered from all those years ago. Slowly, he stopped checking his phone every few minutes. He started asking questions. The silence between us was no longer a barrier. It became a rhythm. The sound of sanding metal, the click of sockets, the soft creak of the creeper sliding under the chassis. We didn't need to talk much. The work did the talking. One day, a few weeks in, I found him in the garage before me. I hadn't asked him to start early. He was just there. Elbows deep in the engine bay, humming to himself, grease smudged across his cheek. When he saw me, he smiled, not sheepishly, not apologetically, but with pride. Real pride. And I realized then that he wasn't just rebuilding a car, he was rebuilding himself. As time passed, we talked more, really talked. He told me about the pressure he felt to be the guy who did something, who stepped up. He said watching Caleb struggle made him feel helpless, and selling the car felt like the one move he could make that would have real impact. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said one night, tightening a bolt under the hood. "But I didn't think about how I was doing it, or what it would cost." I nodded, because that was the heart of it. Good intentions don't excuse bad decisions, but they're a place to start making better ones. The day we fired up the engine again was something I'll never forget. It wasn't just the roar of a V8 echoing through the garage, it was the sound of a rift beginning to close. When that motor turned over and David whooped with joy, I saw him not as the reckless teenager who had made a selfish mistake, but as a young man finally starting to understand what it means to earn something. To build, not just take. To restore, not just replace. Eventually, I handed him the keys again, not as a gift, but as a sign of trust. "It's yours to drive," I said, "but only when you're ready to carry what it means." He didn't argue. He didn't rush out for a joyride. He just looked at the keys in his hand like they were a crown he wasn't sure he deserved. And maybe he didn't. Not yet. But he was getting there. Every mile, every hour, every repair brought him closer. What had started as betrayal had become something unexpected, an education. Not in mechanics, but in responsibility, in legacy, in love. The kind of education no school could teach. The kind only a broken bond and the will to repair it could offer. It was sometime in late September when the turning point finally came. Not as a grand explosion or a single dramatic outburst, but in a quiet moment when truth crept in unnoticed and changed everything. The days had started getting shorter, and the air held that crisp edge that signaled the end of summer. David and I had been working on the Chevelle for weeks now, nearly 2 months of late evenings, busted knuckles, and slow, careful progress. The gaps between us had narrowed, almost without either of us realizing it. We had gone from strangers avoiding eye contact to 2 men standing shoulder to shoulder, learning how to speak a language neither of us had used in years. Honesty. But still, even with the rhythm we'd built, there was a part of David that hadn't fully opened. I could feel it in the way he sometimes stared off while tightening a bolt, or how his smile never quite reached his eyes when I complimented his work. There was a weight he carried that no wrench could loosen. That afternoon, we had just finished aligning the hood. The car was starting to look like herself again, glossy paint shining under the shop light, engine purring like an old friend finally waking up. I stood back, arms crossed, pride swelling in my chest. But David stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the car like he was watching something I couldn't see. "It's almost done," I said, my voice light, hoping to break the silence. He nodded, slowly. "Yeah, it is." But the way he said it, soft, distant, told me this wasn't about the car anymore. I waited, knowing better than to push. And after a moment, the dam finally cracked. "I thought if I helped Caleb it would make me feel less useless," he said suddenly. His voice wasn't defensive or angry, just tired. Everything was falling apart for him. His dad, his house, his family. And I couldn't stand watching it happen. I turned toward him, letting him speak. "When I looked at that car, I saw money. And when I looked at you, I saw someone who wouldn't understand. I thought you'd just say, no, and then I'd be stuck doing nothing again." He rubbed the back of his neck, voice starting to waver. "But I didn't think about what it meant to you. I didn't think about why it mattered. I was just trying to fix something for once." And there it was. The truth, laid bare. Not just the surface-level justification, but the root of it. David hadn't sold the car out of malice or greed. He had sold it because he felt powerless in a world filled with problems he didn't know how to solve. He thought action, any action, was better than helplessness. And in that rush to make a difference, he sacrificed something that wasn't his to give. I sighed and leaned against the workbench. "You know," I said, "when I was your age, I tried to pawn my dad's watch. He worked in a steel mill, wore it every day for 30 years. I thought I'd get a few $100 to help with rent. I figured he had plenty of other watches." David looked up, surprised. "Did you?" I shook my head. "No. I walked into the pawn shop and froze. Something stopped me. I realized that watch wasn't just his, it was everything he'd given up so I could have a better life. I didn't sell it, but I thought about it. And that thought was enough to show me how easy it is to cross a line when you think your reasons are noble. David didn't respond right away. He just sat down on the garage stool, staring at the floor. I didn't know how much it meant until it was gone, he said. And even then, I didn't know how to say it. I was ashamed. His voice cracked slightly, and I could see the young man buried beneath the tough exterior. The same kid who used to bring me broken toy trucks to fix, wide-eyed and full of trust. I thought if I worked on it with you, maybe I could make it right, but I don't know if I can. You already have, I said gently. Not because you brought the car back to life, but because you finally understood what it really is. I paused, then added, this car wasn't about the engine or the paint or the money. It was about what it represented. Commitment, sacrifice, family. You gave that away too easily. But now you're learning how to build it again. And that's more valuable than anything you could have paid me back with. David nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I could tell my words had landed not as absolution but as a quiet offering of peace. He had carried guilt for weeks, maybe longer, and now he was starting to lay it down, not because it had disappeared, but because he was strong enough to face it. We didn't say much more that day. We didn't need to. Sometimes revelation doesn't come as lightning or thunder. It comes as a simple breath in a quiet room when the heart finally stops running and starts listening. Later that evening, as we sat in the driveway watching the sun sink behind the trees, David turned to me and said, "Do you think Grandpa would have forgiven you if you had sold his watch?" I smiled softly, the memory still sharp after all these years. "Eventually," I said, "but not until I proved I understood what I almost lost." He nodded again. "I think I'm starting to get that." And I believed him, because in that moment, beneath the fading sky, surrounded by the sound of crickets and the soft ticking of cooling metal, David wasn't just a boy who made a mistake. He was a young man beginning to learn the hardest lesson life has to offer, that real value isn't found in things but in the stories behind them, the people who carry them, and the trust that binds them together. And once you break that trust, the only way back is not by asking for forgiveness but by earning it piece by piece. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. The morning we were finally ready to roll the Chevelle out of the garage, there was a stillness in the air that felt almost ceremonial. It had been months since I'd last seen her whole, shining under the dim garage lights, the deep rumble of her rebuilt engine now echoing in my chest like a second heartbeat. David stood next to me, wiping the last smudge of polish from the hood, his hands rougher than they had been at the start of this journey. He didn't say much, he didn't need to. His work had said everything. Every scratch on his knuckles, every night he stayed up past midnight sanding down imperfections, every time he cursed under his breath but kept going anyway. Those were the words I needed to hear from him. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was about the man he was becoming, the one he chose to become after he realized he'd broken something he couldn't just buy back. I opened the garage door, sunlight flooding in, hitting the chrome just right. For a second, I felt the sting of tears threatening, not because of the car itself, but because I was finally letting go of the anger, the hurt, the disappointment, not forgetting, not pretending it didn't happen, but releasing it, piece by piece. David walked around to the driver's side, hesitating. I could see the conflict in his eyes, his desire to reclaim something, and his fear that maybe he still didn't deserve it. I handed him the keys without a word. He looked at them in his hand like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "You sure?" he asked, voice quiet. I nodded. "You built it. You've earned the right to drive it." He didn't smile. Instead, he inhaled deeply, slid into the seat, and turned the ignition. The engine came alive instantly, that familiar low growl reverberating through the driveway. It didn't just sound like a car. It sounded like redemption. We took the first drive together, just the two of us, no destination in mind. The road stretched out in front of us, golden fields on either side, the breeze coming through the open windows. At first we didn't talk. We just listened. The tires against the pavement, the steady rhythm of the engine, the occasional bird cutting across the sky above. But then, as if something inside him finally settled, David spoke. "This feels different," he said. "It's like I'm driving a piece of history." I smiled faintly. "You are." He looked over at me, eyes soft. "I didn't understand before. I thought I did. But I didn't. Not until we rebuilt it. Not until I had to earn back every inch of it." I looked at him. Not the boy who once slammed doors and avoided responsibility, but a young man who had, through real labor, begun to understand the meaning of value. It wasn't the kind of change you see overnight. It was slow, quiet, built layer by layer. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just proud of the car or even the restoration we'd done. I was proud of him. Proud that he didn't run away from what he did. Proud that he didn't take shortcuts. Proud that when it would have been easier to blame or avoid, he faced it all and did the work. We stopped by a small gas station on the edge of town, the kind with a dusty old Coca-Cola machine and a faded map inside. As I stepped out to grab us a couple drinks, a man in his 40s approached David by the car. I watched from a distance, curious. He pointed to the Chevelle, clearly admiring it, and asked something. David answered, then nodded toward me, calling me over. "My dad, and I restored it," he said, pride finally breaking through his voice. "She's been in the family for years." The man smiled. "Beautiful machine. You don't see ones like this anymore. She must have meant a lot to your old man." David looked at me for a long moment, then replied, "Yeah, more than I realized." I stood there, drink in hand, heart full, because it wasn't just a stranger admiring the car. It was a stranger confirming what I already knew, that something had shifted, that what was broken had been mended, not to what it was before, but to something new, stronger, more honest. And as David and I stood there shoulder to shoulder, I finally understood the real victory wasn't in getting the car back, it was in getting my son back. That night after the drive, after the gas station, after the quiet smiles and the stranger's compliment that seemed to land deeper than any apology ever could, David and I pulled back into the driveway, the Chevelle's headlights cutting through the early fall dusk like twin beacons. The garage door stood open, waiting, but we didn't roll her back in right away. Instead, we sat there in the stillness, the car idling low, our thoughts loud. I looked over at him and saw something new, something steady behind his eyes, a calm maturity that hadn't been there before. And that's when I decided the final step wasn't about the car anymore. It was about him, about trust, about passing the torch in a way that felt earned. I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a folded envelope, and handed it to him. "Open it," I said. He glanced at me, confused, then slipped his finger under the seal. Inside was the title. His name was already printed on it right beneath mine. For a moment he just stared. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I transferred it last week," I said quietly. "After we rebuilt the transmission. After I saw the way you were showing up, really showing up." He blinked hard, hands trembling slightly as he held the paper. "You're giving it to me?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded. "Not giving, trusting. You already paid for it in full, with time, with sweat, with change." He set the envelope down in his lap and leaned back, overwhelmed. I could tell the gesture had shaken something in him, not out of entitlement, but out of understanding. For the first time, he truly grasped the magnitude of what had been handed to him. Not a car, not a title, but a legacy, a second chance, a bridge built brick by brick between father and son. Then came the part I hadn't prepared for. He looked over at me, eyes glassy, and said, "I don't want to take it, not all of it, not like this." I furrowed my brow. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly. I want us to co-own it. You and me. Like we rebuilt it. Together. I don't want this to be something I take. I want it to be something we share. I stared at him, stunned. Not by the idea, but by the man speaking it. This wasn't the same kid who'd once made decisions behind my back, who thought he knew better. This was someone who now understood balance, respect, and the weight of shared history. He didn't want ownership, he wanted partnership. That, more than anything, told me we had truly turned a corner. I nodded slowly, a lump rising in my throat that I didn't bother trying to swallow. Then that's exactly what we'll do, I said. You and me, 50-50. He smiled then, really smiled. Not out of relief, not out of victory, but out of something purer, connection. A boy who had finally made peace with the man he'd hurt. A father who no longer needed to carry the weight of disappointment. We sat there a few more minutes before finally pulling the Chevelle back into the garage. As the engine quieted and the headlights clicked off, something settled in the air. A chapter closed. Not in anger or regret, but in understanding. Over the next few weeks, things at home changed. Not in dramatic ways, but in the small, meaningful ones that matter most. David started spending more time at the dinner table. He asked about my day. He even came home early some nights, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One evening he brought Caleb over and introduced him properly. The two of them helped me organize the garage, sweeping up months of dust and clutter. It wasn't just about making things neat. It was about restoring something sacred, the space where everything had fallen apart and where it had all come back together. One Sunday morning, I found David sitting in the car, engine off, just sitting. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just there, eyes closed, hand resting on the wheel. I didn't say anything. I just stood in the doorway and watched. That moment told me more than words ever could. He had made peace not just with me, but with himself. He had finally absorbed the lesson, not just about trust, but about values, about how some things in life are worth more because of what they represent. He had learned that once something is broken, the process of mending it is what gives it deeper meaning. The scar, if you will, becomes part of the story. Later that same day, we took the car to a local classic show, not to compete, but just to be there, to show people what we had built. We didn't brag. We didn't even put up a sign. But those who walked past could see the bond in the way we stood beside her. Not as owner and observer, not as father and son trying to fix things, but as equals, as partners, as two people who had once fallen apart and who had chosen, intentionally, to put every piece back together. Time has a funny way of softening sharp edges. What once felt like a wound I'd never recover from, a betrayal that hollowed out something deep in my chest, has now become part of a much bigger picture, one that I didn't see clearly when I was in the thick of it. In the quiet that came after the rebuild, after the long nights in the garage and the conversations that hurt more than any argument ever could, I found something I wasn't expecting. Peace. Not just with David, but with myself. The Chevelle still sits in the garage gleaming under the warm lights, but it's not just a car anymore. It's a monument, a reminder, a living, breathing metaphor for everything we went through. Not just a restoration of steel and chrome, but of a relationship that could have rusted away if we hadn't chosen to fight for it. The bond between a father and son isn't always easy. It's not made of constant agreement or effortless understanding. Sometimes it's made of silence, of distance, of mistakes so big they leave cracks in your foundation. But if there's love beneath it all, and the willingness to admit when you've gone wrong, those cracks don't have to stay open. They can be filled, one gesture at a time, one apology at a time, one lesson at a time. David's not perfect. I'm not either. But that's the beauty of it. We're both learning, still building, still tuning the engine of our connection. And now it's not just about what I passed down to him. It's about what we build together. The garage isn't mine anymore, it's ours. I see him there some nights after work, wiping down the Chevelle, tinkering with tools, blasting music too, loud like I used to when I was younger. And every time I hear the rumble of that engine fire up, I don't think about the day it was stolen out from under me. I think about the day he earned it back. I think about the kid who made a terrible mistake, and the man who owned it, who didn't run from it, who stayed and put in the work to make it right. That's what makes me proud. Not the title, not the show ribbons, not even the clean finish of a rebuilt ride, but the process, the growth, the hard-earned understanding between two people who once stood on opposite sides of a broken line and decided to meet in the middle. And maybe that's what fatherhood really is. Not control, not discipline, but guidance. A willingness to stand back and let someone fall, knowing that when they get back up, they'll remember the lesson a whole lot longer than if you had just handed it to them wrapped in protection. The easy way doesn't build character. The hard way does. And now when I look at David, I no longer see a boy trying to take shortcuts. I see a young man who knows the price of trust. I see someone who's learning that value doesn't come from the dollar amount of what you own, but from the meaning behind it. He carries that now. I see it in the way he handles things, with care, with patience, with a level of maturity I once feared he'd never find. We still take the Chevelle out sometimes, Sunday drives, just the two of us, down back roads we've traveled for years. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just let the wind do the talking. But when we do talk, it's honest. It's real. He tells me about work, about Caleb, about how he's saving up for a place of his own one day. He asks for advice now, not because he has to, but because he wants to. And I give it freely, knowing that he'll listen. Not blindly, but with discernment, with the awareness of someone who's been through the fire and come out forged a little stronger. There are still days when I think back to that empty garage, that gut punch of betrayal, the way I felt like something sacred had been stripped away without permission. But I no longer carry those memories with bitterness. I carry them with perspective. Because sometimes it takes losing what you love to understand what it truly meant to you. And sometimes it takes hurting someone to realize how deep love can run, and how hard it is to rebuild trust once it's been broken. But here's the thing, it can be rebuilt. If both people are willing, if both people are honest, if both people are ready to get their hands dirty to show up every day, even when it's uncomfortable. To anyone listening, maybe you've been where I was. Maybe someone you love did something that shattered your trust. Maybe you're carrying that weight, wondering if things will ever feel right again. Or maybe you're the one who made the mistake. Maybe you're standing in the ruins of something you once took for granted, unsure if you'll ever be allowed to rebuild it. My advice? Don't let pride write your story. Don't wait for someone else to make the first move. Do the work, say the hard things, own the damage, and then slowly, so slowly begin to put it back together. Not to erase what happened, but to create something better in its place, stronger, wiser, rooted in the truth. In the end, it wasn't about the car. It was never about the car. It was about what it represented. The years of sacrifice, the invisible weight of fatherhood, the silent lessons passed down from generation to generation. And now, when I see David behind the wheel, when I see him treat that Chevelle with the same reverence I once did, I know the lesson landed. I know he heard it. I know it stuck. And that, more than anything, is what matters. Because at the heart of every story like this, behind every object we fight to protect, is something more important. The bond we're really afraid of losing. The love we hope never gets taken for granted. The connection we hope will always find a way back, no matter how far it strays. If you've ever experienced betrayal from someone you love, you know that the pain runs deeper than words can describe. Maybe it was a family member, a close friend, someone you trusted with your whole heart, only to find that trust shattered in a single moment. Or maybe, like David, you were the one who made a choice that hurt someone who only ever wanted the say, best for you. This story isn't just about a car, it's about something we've all felt. The weight of disappointment, the hope for redemption, and the power of rebuilding what was broken. So ask yourself, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have forgiven your child? Would you have given them the chance to earn back what they lost? Or would you have walked away holding on to the pain instead? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your perspectives. Drop a comment below and share what this story brought up for you. Maybe you've had to rebuild trust in your own life. Maybe you're still trying. Whatever your story is, you're not alone. And if this video moved you, even just a little, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. We tell real stories that touch the heart,